This is a representation, a very simple outline of one of the photographs that I have sent you that you can work from. And there's nothing in the middle of it, you see there, because I want to put everything in the middle of it with the paint, if you like. And I'm going to also attempt to combine these ideas of shape, tone, and edges in one go. What I really mean by that is I'm going to apply shapes, because in this image you will notice that the rocks are cutting, in this diagonal fashion. They're sort of sliced as they go slip into the sea and whatever. So that's the nature of the shapes that I'm going to try to create. The tone is going to be created by allowing myself to increase and decrease the amount of water. So as I dissolve those shapes, they'll dissolve into different tones, different darkness and lightness, because the water will be more dense or less dense, obviously. And the edges will, in a sense, be controlled by that too, because if they bleed a lot, they'll have a very soft edge. If they bleed just a little bit, they'll have a hard edge. So I'm going to try and work with that. I'm just simply working. This is a number 8 soft round brush, and I'm just going to work entirely with that. But I'm going to begin to go in with darker tones to start with. Now what I'm going to do first, ever so slightly, is just give a little bit of dampness to the area, but I mean just a dampness. We don't need to soak the paper. The dampness just gives you that little bit of extra movement in the paint. I'm being lazy here and using this brush. You could use a nice big brush and get it done quicker, And really what you're looking for is, if you were to touch that with the back of your hand, it would feel cool or cold, but it shouldn't be wet. In other words, when you turn your hand around, you shouldn't have loads and loads of shiny water on it. And that's an indicator. So that's enough. And if you think you've gone too far, you can obviously wait for a minute or two till it dries back a wee bit. But we just want enough to carry the paint. And then what I'm going to do is just go in initially with this tone, which I've made up from burnt umber and ultramarine blue. So it's a neutral, really quite a neutral grey. And it will be, when you see it now, it will be relatively strong. And I'm just going to go in and put in variations of these or diagonal shapes that I saw. Okay, I'm not reproducing them exactly. Just want you to see what happens when I control. There's a thick one there, look, thinner one, and so on. And now when I rinse the brush, just take the brush. This brush is just damp, and I'm going to encourage, and I can have a rag beside me so I can mop away the paint on the water if it gets too much. Give it a wee rinse again. So I'm working in between here to create half tones using the clean water, okay? And taking that right out to the edge. There's another rock beside it, which I'll deal with in a wee second. And I'm just following those shapes. And you notice at the top I've left a little gap because I want to meld those, because they sort of meld together at the top here. So I haven't added any more paint since those first couple of stripes that I put on, or a few stripes that I put on, because I'm going to go back in and add more a little bit later. But what we've got now is the essence of that quality of that rock. And we're going to refine that in a minute when this dries. Okay, so this is just the base coat. You can see that the original lines that were very dark have now kind of disappeared because I've added water, obviously. And while that's beginning to dry, I'm going to take the same thing with this one behind here. So I'm going to put a darker tone in beside it. It'll probably bleed because I'm not being patient enough. But then there's this rock in here. I'm leaving some of the light tones in there behind that. And then again, clean the brush, rinse the brush, pardon me, just a damp brush here, and just occupying those empty spaces, allowing the colour to bleed into them, so we get our natural tones, variations, and the edges. We're getting variations in the edges, but we're going to change all of that once this area is actually dry. So, you know, put a wee bit of tone in there. So it's very basic series of shapes, but what we have is begun to get the feel of rocks. Okay, now what I might do is flood a little bit of color around the background here, really just to get rid of the white, and then we'll let the whole thing dry, and then we'll go in and refine this. So there we go. Just I'm trying to avoid touching the edges because, as I say, I've been a wee bit impatient. But that suggests maybe a sky or water or something going on just in the background here. We'll let this dry, and then we'll go in and work that up a little bit more. So what we have here is a slightly drier underpainting. I've put a little shadow in the bottom corner there just to occupy that. Gives it a better feel of rocks as well. But now what we want to do is look at those shapes again, go through the process again, but this time maybe with a little more care, and begin to break these bits of marks up slowly, or slightly more slowly, and give it some structure, if you like, and think hard about the tone. Now what I have on the brush is quite a deep color. You can maybe see there's it's a strong color going on here, but it's going to be a slightly slower. I'm not going to flood it so quickly this time. So the very first thing I'm going to do is work into the rock that's back in behind here. I'm going to put two or three marks there. Okay, in a similar way that I did earlier, except you notice there that just that wee bit denser. Now I'm cleaning the brush. Now I'm just taking some, but not much of the water off, so that I can again bleed the areas in between. Okay, so I'm just filling the gaps almost with water, or a little water, not too much, just to encourage a little bit of bleeding, but not too much there. And then again, clean the brush when the brush feels as if it's too much paint on it, and let it go, let it be cleaned. We'll leave that for the moment. We'll move on to some of these shapes here, and you can see that now I'm putting in the shapes. There's more of a structure to the shapes, if you like. I'm going to put in one there, but basically at the end of the day, they're just a series of diagonal lines of different thicknesses. But what makes them work better is once I manipulate them using the paint, or the water. So there's the water going on, there's the edges, or there are the edges, just beginning to soften that a little bit more. Again, in this area here, which is dry at the minute but is now wet, and that causes the darker tone to bleed over. And the same on the other side of that. Let that tease away like that. And on down there, maybe give some more to the bottom in a wee minute. And so I'm manipulating what already is on the board, on the paper. And again, lovely big one there if I want. And maybe down there. Again, when you put them on at first, they look quite strange. But once we work the water to either side of them, again, not overly doing the water, just enough to give it movement. And again, clean the brush, a little damp brush again going in, and you can see that these marks begin to relate rather than being like stripes. And again up here, a bit of shadow trimming down there, a bit maybe down there, thinner than the previous ones. Rinsing the brush, clean it here. You can see with a rag, so that there's just enough dampness, wetness. You can hopefully see the glistening on my hand there, and we'll work in between these shapes and drag them through. So the water is doing all of the work, or most of the work here. You can drag them, so modeling and keeping that sense of the diagonal that was the essence of these rocks, it seems. I'll work the edges at the top there. And again, they'll keep moving, so you sometimes need to come back and checking what's going on in there and whatever. And maybe what I'll do is this shape here that had the sort of shadows on it, I'll put that in there. Just give that a wee bit of depth to hold in the bottom, just as a bit of interest there. And we'll let that dry, and we'll come back to it one more time. This is now dry, and what I'm thinking of, there's two ways to look at this, because it depends on how you want to approach painting. Sometimes you want to keep this boldness and freshness in a landscape or seascape, and structures like this is really what you want. It may be that you want to go into it a bit more and work this up a wee bit more, which is what I'm going to do. For instance, I want to create a stronger sense of where the light and shade is, especially along the top here. So what I'm doing again, this time with a slightly smaller brush, this is a little number 6 brush, and it's again fairly dense paint to begin with. So what I'm doing, this should be dry so I can hopefully lean on it. But I noticed that the right side tends to be in the shadow, so there's lumps going along there like that along the right sides. If I take my brush, clean off the paint, and then just gently encourage this on down here, and again just tease that. You see it's now bleeding towards the water there and there. Rinse the brush because I've picked up quite a lot of water there. Drag those down, fill that. So the dark that I put on in those little U shapes is now kind of bleeding towards the other side, so that we have a light and shade sort of side there, and drag that down and here. So we have this scrumply top to the rock. You can see that hopefully appearing, and these little cuts in the rock as the thing goes down. And at this stage, what I could do probably is, this is a clean, dry brush, while there's still moisture here, ever so gently, you see I'm wiggling the brush and then slowly lifting it away, just to create a highlight or a light. Hold that a moment to let it soak, and then slowly drag it away. If I overdo it, if I rub too quickly and I drag it too quickly, you know, sometimes it can damage things. But you can see that I'm rinsing the brush because it's got a wee bit dirty. Again, now it's dry. Here, just hold that, wiggle it, wait till it soaks up into the brush, and then drag away, which is giving me these nice lumpy shapes at the top of the rock. And I can follow this process on down now if I want to refine it. What I mean by that is I can start, say I go down there, there's that dark, but I'm taking more time this time. We're making slower, thinner lines. And this is what I mean sometimes, you want a bold sort of painting, in which case you may not want to go into this detail, but likewise you might want to. So there's what simply looks like what is a series of diagonal thin lines. Clean brush is being wiped now with my rag, rinsed again and wiped slightly. It's just damp to the touch, and I'm now just very gently dragging these colors down. Rinse the brush if you're in doubt. Just get rid of any paint on the brush, so that you're always dealing, because the paint is there, it doesn't need to go. And your brush is now the tool for manipulating the paint. It's not a tool anymore for putting paint on. Rinse the brush, dab it down damp, just drag a little bit of water and encourage the lines to go where the water's going. And you will sometimes get them. I'm getting some little slightly cauliflowery things, not too much. But actually in the case of rocks, it's sometimes quite useful there. I'm putting quite a lot of water on there. You see it bleeding suddenly. And if that happens, just use the water to drag a little more down there. And you can see that the deeper the tone, the deeper the cut. Generally speaking, the illusion in painting is if you have a dark tone, it suggests depth. So therefore, these really dark tones that I'm putting on, you can see, you feel as if you could put your finger into a gap in the rock. And what I'll do is I'll maybe carry some of these down here. So this time again, slower and more careful. Certainly slower, more careful. But, and there's a nice big one down there. Let's put a big shadowy cut in the rock here. Maybe a couple here just to use up my paint. Okay, there and there, let's say. Maybe one there. Getting carried away. As always, one of my problems, I will confess to everyone, is I enjoy the action of painting so much that I frequently overdo the whole thing. So let's go in here. Slightly damp brush, you can see, and a little bit of water on it. Trail that through, rinse it, load it with just enough water to encourage that, the edges. And this is the E we talk about, edges. So we started with shapes, we put on different tones, and dark tones, light tones, and now I'm trying to manipulate the edges of those tones. So for instance, this is all crisp, but when I run my damp brush along the edge, it's now slightly softer. So it looks like a different type of rock than it would have if I'd left it to be hard edges. I suppose you have to work fairly fast. You need the dark paint to still stay moist to be able to do this. You can't go away, have a cup of tea and come back, because obviously that's dry and then it won't move, or at least not very easily. And maybe when I'm at it, there's kind of a rock behind a rock here. So there's that idea of depth. So when I really bang in a really dark area there, that suggests that this one is behind that one. And again, rinse my brush, just moist but not wet, and just encourage that. You see a nice velvety edge appearing, so that it doesn't look like too artificial. And what I might do is do what I did with this one here, create a little shadow lumps there and there, and again rinse. And those that look kind of odd will not look so odd once I model them. Rinse the brush, damp it, trail that around so that they fade into the rest of the picture. So you have these sort of lumpy tops to the rocks. So I think actually I would like a couple more cuts going down there. It doesn't looks too artificial to me. There's a couple of wee drag marks. Rinse, damp, and with the moisture you've already got there, just gently, ever so gently drag it through. So you get, and the more of these marks you make, the different the rocks will appear to be. And what I could do, and what I'd like to do actually, is go back to some of this lifting out idea. So I've got a moist brush there, just putting a wee bit of water there. Now I'm drying it on a rag, holding my brush for a second, slowly moving it until it's lifting away. And it depends on the nature of your paper as well. Some paper will let you do this very easily and quickly, and some won't. The better paper will allow you to put a brush on like this and push it forward and backwards a little bit. Then when it's completely dry, just go back to where you were and hold that brush and ever so lightly move it away, and you'll get a slightly lighter highlight, if you like. We'll do the same up here. Look, put a wee bit of rub in there, dry the brush and just hold it and lift it, and you get lights carried on, so on. It's just that technique alone can be fun, just to play around with it. But what we're beginning to get here is something that has a feeling of being a rock. Again, you can leave it at that, or you can increase the surfaces. You can get more detail, for want of a better word. So in other words, I'm putting on some more paint here. And what I could do if I really want, I could start saying, well, you know, that's a bit like the wood grain in tree bark. You know, we could put some smaller marks. And when you think about it, you know, wood grain and tree bark isn't unlike the nature of this rock that we're doing. See all these wee slash marks. Then rinse, damp, drag through that lightly, rinse, damp the brush. So just to let you see, the brush is being rinsed. It's wet now. I'm taking and I'm just rubbing it on that rag, and then with the moistness that's there, just drag through those little slash marks while there's still movement in them. And you see that I can create a very fine illusion of a grainy sort of rock there if I want in here, you know. And we can go on and do that for a very long time. If you're so inclined to want that, we can put more there, like slash, some thick, some thin. Rinse, damp brush, and then drag them into shape, into that nice linear sort of controlled shape. And you see that almost like slate, you know, that you're creating with the illusion of the brush. And it's for me, it can kind of almost addictive, which painting can be. There's another bit of shadow there. Rinse, damp, and drag. Just at the top edge and at the bottom edge. Pull it on into the rest of it. And so on. And we can do that with different colors and all sorts of things. And you know, while we'll have a little color in the brush, you know, even just to make it, give it context, if I put a little line there and maybe try to put a wee bit of tone. I know I haven't really used particular colors, so you know, but you know, if you imagine this a wee bit of water or something, sea in the background here, you know, just trying to give it, you know, a context. There's not much space to do it, but you know, there we go. The rocks look like they're in a place. So out of this little exercise, think about applying shape with paint. Then think about the variations in tone. Is it very dark, very light? And then manipulate the edges. So put your paint down and use the moisture of your brush to move the paint and spread the paint. And just practice this method and it will start to give you some nice results. What I'd like to look at now are different type of rock forms, if you like, pebbles, you know. So we've been thinking about rugged, how to create a sense of ruggedness in a rock. But what we might want to do now is have a think about those things that are smooth and rounded, because that involves a different form of edge and blending and tone. So all those words that we're dealing with. So what I'm doing here is I'm just creating simply a series of oval shapes, you know, elliptical shapes. So I'm drawing them lightly, but hopefully just enough that you can see them. Normally I wouldn't draw them quite so dark. And you know, let's have one behind another like that, and maybe another coming up here around there. And let's see, let's not get carried away. Maybe round like that, and say that. So it's just a series of little elliptical shapes really. And what I'm going to do in a moment then is I'm going to start to first of all create the form, the third dimension of it, and then we'll try and see if we can create some interesting surfaces and textures within each of these sort of pebbles. So what I have is on my brush is just I'll show you a little palette I'm using, but I'm just using ultramarine and some burnt sienna here, which has given me this very, very neutral color. You can see it's really amounts to a warm gray, which is all I want really, because at the moment what I'd like to do is just create the illusion of light and shade in each of those shapes and try to see that I can create the illusion that one shape is behind the other by using tone. In other words, if this edge here was light, then the area immediately behind it should be a little bit darker, and so on. So we have that variety happening. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use relatively light paint. You can see here what I'm doing is I'm just putting a tone over this side, then very quickly rinsing the brush and using water to spread that across, encourage that over towards the lighter side. Okay, and just damp that area a little bit more. And all I want is the illusion, I guess, of an egg, of some, an egg shape really. So then let's move on below here. I know we're working quicker, and therefore there's a danger of one color bleeding to another, but we'll try to risk it and see how it goes. So up in there is a little bit darker than the tone above it. So let's say that this pebble, if you like, is that bit darker underneath. Although we're going to do a lot more work to this. Then again, with a little water, not too much, encourage that over into the rest of the shape. Okay. So that's back there a little bit. Then this one here will create a little tone, a bit of dampness just on it first there to encourage the water, or rather the paint, to move a little bit more. So we'll have that one in there. And while we're waiting for that bit of moisture to dry, I'll actually damp the area in these. Because it really is just dampness we want here. We really don't want it to be glistening wet. Okay. And then back to our tone paint. There you can see there, drop a little bit on around the edge of the first one that we did. Encourage it over, wiping the brush so that there's no more paint. So the paint I already have on here is all I need to spread, because there's plenty of color there really at this moment, over towards a slightly lighter tone on the other side. Okay, and we'll refine all of this later on. Then here, let's maybe take this one. Maybe this one is quite deep, so let's make that a deeper tone right in here. Again, I'm trying very carefully, or very hard I should say, to avoid getting it to run. And it can get a little bit lighter around the edges there, And I'll just clean the brush, damp brush, and encourage the rest of that paint out to the edge where it is perhaps catching light along the top edge here. Okay. So what we're doing at least now is occupying the shapes. So we have different, some dark, some light. Maybe make another little darker tone one down in here, look. So let that be a bit darker, right up in there in the shadows. And this is just, we started with shapes, which was the outline in pencil. So there's our S. And we're thinking tone, T, of the word stem, So we're at T, which is tone, and we're getting variation, some dark, some light, to get a bit of variety and the illusion of space also. Then we're going to move on to edges. We've blended the edges to some extent. You see how it's dark going to light, dark going to light, dark going to light here. And even this one at the bottom that I've made pretty much all the same. What I might do is just gently with a dry brush, while it's wet, ever so lightly sponge that away, look. Just wipe it off the brush, or with a little tissue or whatever, and wipe it again, just to create that roundness. So, we can do all this, perhaps even along the top here. Maybe just take a dry brush, and while there's still a wee bit of moisture, slowly move the brush. Give it time to mop up the water. So we're creating a wee bit of a light highlight there, okay? And let that soften up as the water moves around. And while we're doing that, what I might do, these areas are dry now, so what I might do is just slightly deepen them that wee bit more. In other words, go back in here with this one in behind there, just about there. Clean the brush, dry it, damp it off with a rag, and ever so gently just tease that out a little bit more. So just want that slightly darker edge there, okay. So that edge goes in behind that one, and maybe, and this is me getting carried away as always, let's get a wee bit darker underneath there perhaps as well. Look, a little shadow right there. Rinse brush, mop it up on a, hopefully you can see a rag in the shot there. I think, yeah, I'm just damping the brush on that rag like that. Okay, so I'm leaving a little bit of moisture but not much, and I'm just tapping that around, encouraging that paint to move downwards so that it's sort of a faded effect. Okay, but it looks like it's underneath that one. And one last touch, I suppose I have a tiny little bit of paint left, maybe just increase the illusion of the shadow in this one a wee bit more. So a wee bit more dark there. Rinse brush, damp, and just blend that over towards the lighter tone on the right hand side. So we now have these egg type shapes. You might see little gaps, and that's simply because I've been trying to avoid one touching the other and bleeding. In reality, you might just take more time and wait until they're much drier to do that. What I might do just slightly while those other things are kind of drying is I'm going to pause the thing, make another color, and maybe suggest some color around the background here. What I'm going to do now is just use a slightly green tone. It's a green and a wee bit of burnt sienna, just simply to go around the edges. I'm not going over the rock type forms just yet. I may or may not do so later, but what I want to do is at least get rid of the white, pure white behind these, and B, also the fact that there's a greeny tone there might give it some context, some feeling that maybe these are pebbles that are in or near water. Okay, so I'll go as close as I can to the edges of them with my brush. It's a big flat, like a number 12 flat brush here, just really to mop that around there and get over there. So with some feeling, as I say, of it not being just white, I'll take that light out of the way there so we can see that more clearly. So we're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back and start to see if we can really create some feeling of the quality of pebbles. All we've got now is a structure. What we want to do is create a sense of surface, maybe a greater sense of light, all of the things that give them a real feeling of being a pebble rather than just what they are now, which is slightly more like an egg. What I'm going to try to do now is create a lot more interest in these shapes, and what I'm using is I'm going to try to limit the color, because color isn't absolutely the theme of this exercise. It is about form and surfaces and things. However, I'm using Viridian green and burnt sienna, which is giving me a nice earthy sort of a green color, like a nearly a khaki color. And I'm also using burnt sienna again, this time with ultramarine blue, which is giving me this nice deep neutral, more like you can see a cooler grey. And we'll try to work around that at the moment. So what I'm going to do this time is with the same brush, this little round, like a number 6 I think it is, round brush, try to manipulate dark to light as we did earlier there when we were blocking in, but this time I'm going to make shorter brush marks, and in doing so hopefully create a wee bit of surface quality. So what I mean by that is you can see what I'm doing now, and this is quite dark, but I do want to get a nicer sense of contrast. But look at the way I'm manipulating the brush. I'm squiggling, my hands kind of almost twitching around. I want this to be lovely and dark. I've decided this is going to be the shadow side or the dark side here. So you can see that. Now I'm rinsing up the brush. You can see, I hope, sorry, beg your pardon, there's the wipe on the rag here. And then with the damp brush, continuing to make these dotty moving lines. They're not all the same. They're not just dot, 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 because then the paint will literally look. I'm sort of keeping on moving and not allowing myself to repeat the same movement. So it's jiggling, jiggling around and so on. And I'm working from dark over to light. Time for rinse, because I'm about halfway now. We're going to transfer this tone to a lighter tone because it's just water on my brush. So I'm dragging the remainder of the paint across towards the lighter side, still squiggling around and creating that dappled effect. Rinse the brush again. Now I'm really at the very, very light side. And I could stretch it more. I could maybe leave it at that at the moment. So we now have a nicer, more extreme tonal range. I'll go back in with the dark colour, which is the ultramarine, and a wee bit of sienna. Again, let's really, really enhance a bit there. Rinse the brush, mop it with a little rag, and off we go again. Squiggle, slightly upright, you know, but not going straight in with the point of the brush, but slightly at a high angle. And again, occasionally what happens is you leave a little gap, which also adds to the illusion of the dappled quality of the actual stone. And again, we've got to about halfway. So what I'm going to do is rinse, damp the brush so it's clean moisture on the brush now, and continue across until really we're back to the light area. But this time again, there's more contrast. And basically, I'm going to try to repeat this sort of idea underneath here, leaving a bit of light there so the one behind it can maybe be seen. Again, slightly moist brush, trail the shadow around, moving the brush all the time, jiggling around. Now rinse again, mop up a little bit and use the remainder of the water, squiggle around until we get towards the light side again. And so it goes. We can repeat this. What I might do is just out of interest, I'm sorry, I've got a bit carried away with the green there. So I'm going to put a little bit more of that sienna and ultramarine combination in there, just for the moment. We'll introduce the green a little later. Just got a wee bit too much of the brown in there. There we go. Get that deeper tone in. And again, keep working the brush, squiggling, jiggling around till we get to a certain point here. And then again, brush rinsed, damp, and work on through to the lighter area here and allow that nice dappled light to happen. So we're creating some quite nice illusions of surface, and we can do the same here. Let's get in I'm going to darken, get a wee bit more darker paint in here, because we'd like that corner to be even deeper than the one beside it here, just there, look. So that I just like this one to lift out a little bit, and again off I go with the sort of jiggly technique. There's a technical term for you, jigglyism. And then again, rinse brush, wipe, and continue the spread, jiggling around all the way up to the light. And again, maybe give that a rinse, maybe just soften the last bit of it up so we don't have too much of a hard edge there. So now I have several objects that are beginning to have a feel of roughness to them. And what I'm going to do maybe just before we go into the next phase, just don't be afraid to rub over parts of that just to remove any strange illusions. And also remember, we can still take gently and mop up a little bit of light in behind there. So that's maybe like catching a little bit of sunlight or something just from underneath there, you know. Likewise, maybe even taking and say, oh, about a little bit of light just on the bottom corner of that one. Take my brush, dry, hold it for a second, and then mop and drag away. So that we've just created that little bit more of an illusion of light. And then maybe with the moisture, just soften that. So squiggle again. This time we're working the other way. And the marks very often guide themselves in a sense. So we're creating, you know, these nice illusions. What I want to do now, what I'd like to do now is maybe, again, it might be damp, but we'll try it anyway. Working with the green and the wee bit of sienna that I talked about, that made this nice earthy sort of green, again, mossy colour really. So again, take courage and let's put on a little bit of that moss colour on. Rinse brush, because we can mop it out. We're just staining this area, so it's no longer, we're giving it colour rather than just being that neutral feeling. So this is just water I'm putting on here on top of that daub of green. Still trying to create that jiggly quality in my gestures with the hand, the brush. And it just changes that, gives that, you know, you get these lovely things I notice on pebbles and things where the, you know, either it's a reflection of light or hint that there's been moss or some substance on it, you know, which kind of is very, very nice, you know. And we can carry that over into there as well. And actually what we'll be doing in a minute is removing more paint, but we'll talk about that in a second. And just dab that. I think one of the secrets is constantly being in the move. If you notice my brush, look at the tip of my brush, it's not stopping barely at all, you know, to create these sort of illusions, you know. And we need to just keep building this up. Again, that looks like a big dollop of green, which is exactly what it is, but I wiped the brush there and now I'm actually removing some of it, leaving the dregs of it behind, and therefore leaving the dregs of the colour behind also. And we could do this with other colours. It doesn't need to be green necessarily. A wee bit there. You can leave the odd bit as well, because sometimes, you know, there's bits that don't have colour on them at all. And maybe just take this bit here. I would kind of like that to be a wee bit more interesting. So I'm going to go in there, that edge, because I think it's too white. So make that add a wee bit more sienna into the green. And again, rinse brush and then remove the edges of that. So the rubbing of the brush is creating these nice structures and patterns there. You can see that beginning to happen. And again, at this stage even, I can take, if I just show you here, pardon me, but wiping the brush pretty much dry. And even now, working areas with light. So just ever so slightly removing. So again, maybe a wee bit of moisture to get it going. So sometimes you get on pebbles and things where you get a light tone in amongst the dark for various reasons. You know, you get things going on, and I'm just manipulating that a wee bit more there. So that I want these, I suppose what I'm trying to do is make these look worn and make them look as if, you know, they've maybe been rocked around by the sea for a long time, and you know they've had, you know, they've been banged and rattled around, and they've seen a lot of action, you know. And so you can see, you know, as I'm doing that, I can change it. And you know, if I'm using reasonably decent paper, and this paper I'm using it's all right paper, but it's not the greatest in the world, but it's allowing me to lift away and then repaint and lift away. And each time I do something like that, a different illusion starts to happen, a different illusion of surface. I could even take, it might be kind of nice to introduce a warmth, so maybe a wee bit more sienna into the color here. Look, so you can see that this is going to be a slightly more reddish tone. So I'm actually quite keen on the colors in these things here. So that that's not all green, that is a variation. But all of the time I'm still trying to be aware of the fact that one is below the other.